you have questions, use the chat feature, and then Danielle will let me know when questions come in. So I want to start out by just saying that I am not an expert in legislative history research, but I certainly have done it enough to know it pretty well. My goal today is really just to provide you with an idea of what's entailed, so that if you are faced with a task like this, you kind of know what to expect and where the resources are. I will tell you that after you spend an hour here, you will not be an expert in legislative history research, and if you have to do it again in 6 months or a year, this will all be probably fuzzy. And so, feel free to ask questions, ask for help. The librarians here at the State Law Library and over at Legislative Reference Library and at Minnesota Historical Society Library are all very willing to help and answer questions that you have about doing legislative history research. The other thing is I'm happy to share my slides, and so after the presentation is over, if you want my slide deck, just email me and I will forward it to you, and then you can just hang on to it. I intentionally made this in-person session small so that if people had questions, they would feel comfortable asking questions. And so if you do, feel free to ask questions. If you have some additional information that you would like to share, some of the experiences that you've had doing legislative history, feel free to share that with us. That will just be helpful for everybody. So let's go ahead and get started. I wanted to start with talking about why somebody might want to do legislative history research. And this is Minnesota Statute 645.16, and I won't read all of this to you because you can see it on your screen. But down at the bottom in red are some of the things that you might be looking for when doing legislative history research. Now, one of the other things that I came across recently were these legislative rules that made me pause for a bit, because they're basically saying that the testimony and discussion preserved under this rule should not be admissible in court or administrative proceeding on the issue of legislative intent. And that exists in both the rules of the House and the Senate. So the next step, obviously, those of us in the judicial branch know, to check out the case law and see what the courts have said, because we know that the appellate courts do look at legislative history when they are deciding cases from time to time. So these are just two of many cases that I pulled out some language to let us know and reassure us that it is sometimes worthwhile to do legislative history research when it might be relevant. Okay, so when you're getting started with research, the bill number is the key that unlocks everything else. And so typically what you're doing is you're starting with the Minnesota statute citation. You want to know what's the legislative history on a particular statute. And so and we'll walk through this whole process, but you're going to go from the statute to the session law to the bill number. And when we're talking about legislative history, primary sources are the minutes and then the audio and video recordings of the committees and the floor sessions. So this is what we're talking about with respect to primary sources. Committee minutes, for those of you that have never done this before and haven't looked at committee minutes, they are pretty sparse typically. They don't tend to include a lot of really helpful, juicy information about why a particular bill was presented or was brought forth to the legislature. But sometimes you'll find the attachments to the minutes do have some good stuff in there, and I'll show you some examples when we get a little bit further on. But sometimes you'll see newspaper clippings. If you have something that's pretty big in the news, there probably will be some newspaper articles. You might have letters from constituents who might be affected by the legislation, and so sometimes you'll find that in the file, and that can be very helpful. We are lucky enough that the minutes have been the minutes are online since 2005, and you can see that they're split up between the Legislative Reference Library and the Historical Society Library for the paper that precedes the 2005. And the audio and video, we've got a split again between online access and cassettes. And that 2004, 2005 is kind of the split where you're going to be able to do this research online and when you're going to have to actually go over to either the Legislative Reference Library or the Minnesota Historical Society. And then one thing that people might not realize is that there are not tapes that exist before 1991. They have been destroyed. And so if you are trying to do legislative history on a statute that precedes that time, I will talk at the end about some other options that you might have, but just be aware, save yourself a trip if your statute was passed before 91. I got this information from the Legislative Reference Library, and this is just a little bit more information about kind of the retention of the materials. And this was an agreement made between the legislature with the Legislative Reference Library and the Minnesota Historical Society Library as far as where the tapes were going to go and how long they were going to stay. And what I heard from the director over there is that the Historical Society is not interested in keeping those audio tapes. And so the plan is to move them all over to the Legislative Reference Library. Currently, they don't have space because their space is being occupied by Senate people, and the hope is that they will be moving into their Senate building. Now, that's a little bit up in the air. I think I've heard from the news that some of the senators may stay put in the state office building, so I don't know when this is actually going to happen, and so I didn't change the handout. I would say before you head over to the Historical Society, check the Legislative Reference Library website and just verify that, where the tapes are. But the current state of affairs is what's reflected on the handout that I sent you on Monday. And then this is some additional information I got from LRL, the LRL director, is that they hope to digitize them at some point. And they don't really have a technology solution at this point, but that is their goal. Okay, I'm going to go through two examples today, one where everything is online and one where it is not online, and so you get an idea of how the process works. So the first example is this Minnesota Statute 609.117, and I'm looking in particular at the 2010 amendments. And so we're going to start out by looking at the statute on the reviser's page, and I'll tell you that the reviser has done us all a really big favor by putting statutes and session laws online, scanning the old ones. You can get them back to territorial days. They've done an excellent job with that. And so I actually prefer to use the reviser site over Westlaw, even though I have Westlaw on my desktop. So, everybody has their own preference, but I find it, the integration with the other legislative materials to be better through the reviser's page. So this is what the statute looks on the reviser's page looks like. If you scroll down to the bottom, you'll see a history section, and this is going to give us the session laws that have created and then amended this particular statute section. One tip that I would give you is, and I should just do a little refresher for people that maybe haven't done this in a long time, that the session law is the law exactly as it was passed by that legislature at that session of the legislature, and the statute is the version as it exists, the current state of affairs in the statutes. When you have a situation like this where you have a whole bunch of session laws that have amended the language and you're not sure exactly at what point the language was amended, I will go to Minnesota Statutes Annotated and look it up, and I'll show you why in just a second. We have Westlaw access here for anybody to use, for those of you that might not have it at your desk. And then we also have Minnesota Statutes Annotated in paper. But that's really the place to look to find when your language was added to the statute. I just wanted to show you what it looks like on Westlaw, and so this is the same statute as it appears on Westlaw. Down at the bottom, you'll see the credits. They're not quite as complete as what you get on the legislative reference or the revisers page, I've noticed. You can see that these start with 2001, whereas these start with 1989 was the original passage of this statute. If you click on the History tab on Westlaw, where you're going to go to look for some helpful information is this box that says Editors and Revisers Notes. When you click on that, you'll see some of the session laws listed here, and I'm just going to scroll down a little bit. And it tells you for the more recent session laws, it tells you what change was made by the legislature so that you don't have to go back and look at all of those session laws individually. This is a little summary of what each law did to the statute. And so I can see at the very bottom that in 2010, the statute was changed by adding subdivision 4, which relates to obtaining DNA specimens after somebody's supervision expires. So that saves you a lot of time by just looking for the language that you are interested in. I want to just point this out in case you saw it on the screen and were wondering what it was. There's also a box called Legislative History Materials. If you click on that, you get links to some of the things that I'm going to show you in just a second, the reports and the journals, the House and Senate Journal. I can tell you again that I prefer to pull this up on the revisers page because they have it integrated in a much more helpful way, I think, with the session law. This is something that I learned recently and I thought I would share with you. If you're on the revisers page and there is a link, you see a link on the right to statutes that are new, amended, or repealed. This allows you to put in a statute cite, cite of a statute section, and it's going to show you when it's, how it's been changed over the years. So this is also helpful. I went in and I typed in 609.117 and I said all legislative sessions. Now the limitation to this is it only goes back to 94. So keep that in mind. If you're looking for something older than that, you're not going to find it here. But this is helpful. I put in my statute section and I can see that I've got that it's been amended several times, and it gives me the link to the session law that did the amending. So it's another way to find out that information. I mentioned before that 2004, 2005 is kind of the divider between paper and online. Just to decipher what these cites mean, if you haven't done this before, is for this particular session law we're looking at 2010 Chapter 256 Section 1. And if we go to the session law itself, you can see how this session law is subdivided. And this is where we get the bill number off of the session law. And so this is the key to everything else, is this bill number. And so we're dealing with Senate File 3116, and we have a lot of options from here. If we click on, over on the right-hand side in red, I've got a box that says History and Authors. And that's going to bring us to this very helpful page, and I'll walk through some of the things that are on here. But this is the page for the particular bill that we're talking about. We've got links to all of the Senate Journal pages, and if you scroll down, we've got links to the House Journal pages. This is for the companion bill. I'll talk about that in just a second. And here we go. We also get a link to the companion bill on the page, which is very helpful. It's a lot harder to find this in paper. I'll show you that in just a little bit. But this tells us that House File 3447 was the bill that was the companion bill that was going through the House. And we've got the information for both bills linked on this page. We also have links to all of the various versions of the bill. If you wanted to go back and see how the versions have changed, that's pretty easy to do here. And we're going to go and take a look at Senate Counsel and Research Summary. This sounds like it might contain some really juicy stuff, and it typically doesn't either. So I'll show you what this one looks like. A lot of times it's just, it's a summary of what the bill is about for the legislature. for the legislators to look at. A short summary. Most of them are not very long. It's not going to really get into legislative history, but it is a summary of the bill. One of the things I wanted to point out on this page when we go back to it is that they have very helpfully given us some notes to the Senate and Journal, the House and Senate Journal pages, telling us what happened on those pages. When you're doing this in paper, you just have to look at every single page to see what happened that day. And so this saves us a lot of time by being able to read the notes. For example, we're probably not interested in looking at where it was introduced and had its first reading, but we're definitely interested in knowing that it was referred to the Judiciary Committee and the date that it was referred to the Judiciary Committee. These are things that you need if you're doing this in paper. Well, regardless, you need the dates of when it went into committee and when it came out, because that's where that time span in between is where you'll see a lot of your information about hearings. And so on March 23rd, when it refers to COMM report, that's the committee report. So we can tell by looking at this that it went into committee on March 9th and it came out of committee on the 23rd. I just want to show you what a committee report looks like, because I think that people also might think that the committee report might be filled with really helpful, juicy stuff, and it's typically not either. It's just showing you how the statute is changing by this particular bill. Now we're going to find a lot of helpful stuff under this link that says Committee Hearings and Actions, and so when I click on that, we'll come to this page, and very helpfully they have given us links to the meeting minutes and the audio. So this is what I mean about it being all integrated together from one page. This is super helpful for researchers. First of all, I just want to show you the minutes. You can see what we get here is not a lot of information about, particularly about intent, but what you're looking for is oftentimes dates of testimony, times of testimony, and who was testifying, you know, kind of what their position was. This is very helpful when you have a whole bunch of audio that you need to go through to know, did this person testify at the beginning or at the very end of the day? So this is the portion for our particular bill, just telling us basically who offered up the testimony and who testified and at what times. So this would be a good thing probably to print out and have nearby when you're doing the rest of your research. This is the other link to the minutes. Again, nothing really super interesting other than the times and who testified on that particular day, because this was a different day. And I'm going to go in and play just a little bit of the audio, and I apologize for those of you on the webinar. When we tested this last week, the webinar people were not really able to hear the audio. Basically, we're just going to hear some testimony about this particular bill. If you want the slides, like I said, I'll email them to you and you can listen to this on your computer. So I apologize for that. Oh no. We had some audio issues earlier. I don't think that the state legislature is giving us a virus here.
Let's hope.
Apologize. We tested this all last week and it worked just fine.
Good afternoon. I'll call order the meeting of the Senate Judiciary Committee for March 18, 2010. We have a quorum. The first item on our agenda is Senate Bill 2880, Sir Moore, State Guardian Ad Litem Board Establishment.
So that's not our bill. Our bill shows up a little bit later, but I wanted you to hear the beginning. The quality of the audio on the website is really pretty good, much better than the tape recordings. You can hear people. They're pretty good about indicating who's talking when. I'm just going to attempt to do this without a mouse. Move this forward.
As the consumers, we're also trying to, unstep the fact that, the claims are clear and people know what they're getting into in this particular industry. Mr. Johnson, welcome to the committee.
Madam Chair, and committee member Todd Johnson, Insurance Federation. So it was very brief that Senator Paulson described the health.
The test is reasonable. Now, this issue is actually kind of further along in working its way through in the state of Wisconsin.
Yeah.
They have passed a similar law because they had a similar gap. In Wisconsin, it came up because there was a serial murderer who it turned out had not been caught when they should have been, was much later found. They should have provided a DNA sample much earlier, and as a result, they had retired police officers going out and arresting people. That is, they criminalized the failure to provide a DNA sample. What we've tried to do is take a little bit of a different approach, Senator Olson.
So that just gives you a little bit of an idea about the kinds of things that you're going to hear people say. They are going to be talking about the reason why legislation was brought forward, why somebody went to a legislator and said, hey, we need this change in the law, or why a legislator would have decided to advance this legislation. So you will get that kind of information, but listening to the audio is it's tedious. I mean, it's time consuming. Depending on how long you have, cross your fingers that the legislation that you're interested in is not part of an omnibus bill, because that is just a whole different ballgame. Hopefully you have just a nice, tidy little thing that you're researching and it's not part of a much larger piece of legislation. But that gives you an idea of what the testimony sounds like. I did also want to check the companion bill to see if there were hearings that took place for that, and there were not. Any questions about the online stuff before I move on to the paper? Okay. So we're going to start out very similarly, or exactly the same actually, as what we did with the previous example, where we're going to go from statute to session law to the bill number. And this just gives you an idea of where all of these things exist online and in paper. So this is a different statute that I pulled up here. This one is older, 1990 it was first created. Session Law 1990, Chapter 386, Section 1. And you can see the older session laws look a little bit different, but this is again where we're going to get the bill number. So here we've got 2383, a Senate file. And the House and Senate journals at this point for legislation this old are going to be in paper. And so we have them here at the State Law Library down on the ground floor, and also at the Legislative Reference Library, which is, I have a map on here in the PowerPoint for those of you that don't know where it is, but it's inside the State Office Building. So we're all everything is located on the Capitol complex. The House and Senate journals do exist over at the History Center Library as well. The problem is they only have like the most recent few years out on the floor. And so if you're looking for something that's older, you have to, and I'll go through this in a little bit, but you have to fill out your request, hand it in, and then they have to go pull it from storage. And so it's better to look it up before you head over there if you are looking for material that tends to be or there will be over at the History Center. So this is what the books look like, and what we're looking for is going to be the index volume for the years that cover your legislation. And in the index, you're going to look up your bill by its number, and this might be kind of difficult to see. But again, it's Senate File 2383. We'll get a little bit of the title here. And then these numbers across the page are all of the pages in the Senate Journal where it's going to indicate that action has taken place on the bill. So this is what I mean by having to go and look at all of these pages. much easier to do for the more recent legislation that you can do this online. Again, we're probably not so interested in the first reading unless it says something about reference, because that means it'll indicate which committee it was referred to, and the committee that it was referred to is critical to know, and the date that it was referred. So in this instance, we would want to look up 6286, that page, to find out which committee it went to. If you notice in the middle of the page under Other Proceedings, where it says 6778A, that little A is an indication that it's been amended, that the bill has been amended. And you can see returned from the House, it was approved, and then the chapter in the session laws that it ended up being placed in. And I'll walk through some of this stuff here in just a second. So this is the page where it was the first reading, and where it said first reading and reference. And so we can tell which legislator introduced the bill. Doesn't give us a whole lot of information, but really valuable information, that it was referred to the Committee on Local and Urban Government. And the date is actually on the page, the opposite page, which I didn't take a picture of. But those are things that are vital to know going forward. Now, the other thing that you're going to want to do is to find the companion bill for your particular bill. And the thing that's a little bit confusing is that this table of companion bills only lives in the House Journal. And so if you're trying to find it in the Senate Journal, you'll get very frustrated. You have to go to the House Journal to look this up. And so you can see we've got a table, companion numbers for House and Senate bills on page 1347. And so if we go to that page, there's a little bit of a description of what is included on this page, but I think it's easier just to show you how it works. So this is the page that includes our bill. And the thing that's a little bit confusing is that the bill number column in the far left includes House and Senate bill numbers. And so which column you go to next depends on where you're starting. So we know that we've got Senate File 2383, so we know that we need the House companion. If you had a House Bill 2383, you'd be going to the Senate companion. So you just have to know which column to look in. Know where you're starting. And so we know that our House companion bill was 2683. This is for those of you that haven't traveled around the complex yet. This is a map that shows the locations. As I said, the Legislative Reference Library is in the State Office Building, and this indicates, as does your handout, what they have. And also the History Center, which is a little bit off of the complex, but it's still walkable from here for those of us that are working on the complex, and indicates what they have, at least for now, and that, as I said before, might be changing. Okay, so let's say you have to go over to the Historical Society Library. Some cautionary notes about going over there. Check the hours. The first day that I went over there, I didn't check the hours. I assumed that they had the same hours that all other state government entities had, 8 to 4:30, Monday through Friday. And they're closed on Monday. And one day they're open until 8. And so check the website, make sure that they're open, and give yourself a lot of time. Everything that you do there is going to take time. And so don't think that you can go and get it done in an hour or two. Prepare yourself to have a big chunk of time. Bring with you the information that you need about the committees so that you know the dates and which committee. Bring your ID, because before you get into the library, you have to stop and register, and they'll ask for your picture ID. And then they'll give you a little card, and then you can get into the library. You cannot bring in pens and bags. And so you can bring in pencils and paper. They have a little locker room area off of the desk where you register, where you can put your things that you bring in inadvertently that can't go into the library, and I think it's a quarter. But you have to put your things in the locker. Now, one of the things about copies that I'll tell you is that, and I'm going to show you some of these resources that you think, oh, well, I'll just make a copy of that. You can't make a copy. They don't have self-service copying at the library. You have to go up to the window, and the copy service people will copy it for you, but it's going to go behind all of the other copy jobs that have been requested, and they'll say, do you want it today or do you want it tomorrow? And so it's not going to be an instantaneous thing. So when I was there, we took pictures of the pages that we wanted. And one thing that I'll note is that on the website it says that cell phones are not allowed in the library. However, I hadn't read that when I went to the library and took pictures with my cell phone, and was very obviously taking pictures with my cell phone, and nobody said anything, and so I'm assuming that maybe that policy has changed. But just be aware that you can't just make a quick copy of something, that it's going to be a process. And hopefully you can take a picture of it instead. If you haven't been over here, this is just a picture of what it looks like inside. And some of you probably know that this building that we're sitting in right now used to be the Minnesota History Center, and that this room that we're looking at on the screen used to be located in room 230. Am I right, Cindy? 230 downstairs, which is the room that we typically use for our CLEs if you've come over for any of our other CLEs. This room was that room back before the Judicial Center addition was put on, and we moved in here. This is just a view from another view. This is just a view from another vantage point, showing you kind of where everything is. It's not a huge space. Note that there are not a lot of bookcases in there. A lot of the stuff is in their storage facility. And note also the tables have numbers on them. And so when you go there, you'll need to pick a table and note what number your table is, because that's where your materials will come. So you're going to start out looking at these binders, and they have all kinds of binders that get you to the material that's in storage. And here's a little bit more of a close-up. This happens to be the binders that get us to the tape recordings. I did not take a picture of the binder that gets us to the minutes, but that's another set of binders. And so when you open it up, you're looking for your year of your legislation, and you're looking for your committee that it was referred to, and then also the dates. And you're very hopeful that it will end up that the date span that you're looking for is all included in one box. Because sometimes the date span cuts off and you've got materials in two different boxes. And they only give you one box at a time. So just keep that in mind. So you're going to fill out a request slip like this. And note that you'll put your table number on it. And you indicate location number, which back here was over on the left-hand column. And you will fill this out and give it to the librarian at the reference desk. And then I am told that they actually fax it to the basement. And then the guy with the forklift gets it off the fax machine, gets on his forklift, and drives around and gets this box off of the storage shelf. So you can imagine that this takes some time. Hopefully you go there when there aren't a whole bunch of other people requesting stuff, but most everything that you want to get from this library is going to need to go through that process. So then they deliver it over to your table on a cart like this in a big box, and you open up the box and you have all of these little folders that are marked by date. And so you go through all of the folders that cover kind of your span of time that you're interested in the committee. And they're doing other things with committees with other bills in these committees, and so some of this stuff is going to be relevant to your bill and some of it's not. So you really just have to pull out the folder and go through page by page and look to see what might be relevant to your particular bill. I just pulled this out. This was a minutes, and this was actually this was the particular bill that I went over there to look for, was this 2351, which did turn out to be an omnibus bill, which you'll see in a second what the implications of that are. But this just, again, we don't have a whole lot of information on the minutes, but they are important for date purposes. I wanted to show you an example of an attachment to the minutes. This was not the bill that I was looking for, but this was in the papers that I was going through. And this was a letter that was sent to the legislature based on a bill that was potentially going to change the Blue Earth County Recorder Office to make it appointed rather than elective. And so there were several letters in the file about this particular bill. And so those are the kinds of things that you might see in the folder. So after you have gone through your minutes and determined which days you might want to listen to hearings, then you go back to the binders and you open them up and you look again for your year, the committee that was where the hearings were being heard, and the bill number. And then you'll submit another form, take it to the librarian, they'll go get the box, they'll deliver you your box of tapes. So I opened up the box of tapes that day, and this is what I saw. And I don't know how well you can see this, but almost all of these tapes say Omnibus Juvenile Justice Bill. And unfortunately, this was the bill that I was trying to find some nugget of information about. This one particular piece of the legislation was tied up in this. And so, just hope that you don't have to do that. And I did not listen to all of these tapes. But I did listen to some of them, and so I'll walk through that process a little bit. But this is what you literally get, this box full of cassette tapes. And you can see it does have the bill number and the committee. This happens to be all conference committee hearings in here. Then you're going to go over to the table that has the tape recorder on it, and there are a couple of these. And you actually, go in, you put the tape in, you put the headphones on, and you listen to the tape. And you go forward and you go backwards until you kind of get to the piece that you're looking for. And I have to tell you, it was a little bit embarrassing. I went over there that day, and I happened to be by myself. And so the headphones weren't plugged into the recorder, so I plug them into the hole on the side. And I'm sitting there listening to the tapes for probably a good 2-3 minutes. And finally the librarian comes over and says, everybody can hear you. Everyone can hear the tape playing. And I guess I had it plugged in the wrong hole. So, test that out, make sure that you're not disturbing the other patrons. But that literally is what is entailed in listening to the tapes. So what you're looking for is information about the bill sponsor, why they're putting forth this legislation, and any sort of controversy that would be about the bill and any sort of support. And one of the things that I heard that day when I was listening to these tapes, and this was again about a different statute, not the one I was researching, but this statute 609.746, this is the window peeper statute, interference with privacy, window peeper type people. And so one of the sponsors said, well, you know why we brought this bill forward, because of that landlord in Duluth that was putting the holes in the closets and spying on his tenants. So, I mean, you kind of do sometimes get some juicy stuff. And then the other thing that one of the other legislators mentioned is that they had tried to change the legislation in the prior legislative session. However, the problem was that they weren't able to get agreement about the bill language to the point where they felt like it would protect hospitals who were trying to tape rooms where they suspected Munchausen by proxy by the parent. And so when they suspected that a parent was doing something to harm their child in the hospital, do whatever, they wanted to be able to put video feeds in the rooms, and they were never able to get it, the previous legislation, they were never able to come to an agreement where they could write the language in such a way that they felt like the hospitals wouldn't get in trouble for that. So you do definitely get some interesting information when you listen to the tapes. I'll tell you though, when you're listening to the tapes, it's really hard to hear. A lot of times you have to kind of rewind and go back because there's a lot of like this kind of paper shuffling and side conversations, and so can be a little bit tricky. The audio that's on the website is much better. One other option is to get copies of the tapes, and so you can listen to the tapes in the privacy of your own office if you would rather, or if you want to delegate this to a law clerk or an intern or something, you can send them away with the tapes to listen to. Keep in mind, this is not going to be an instantaneous thing where you say, I want copies, and you get it half an hour later. I mean, expect that it's going to take some time. You will have to pay for the copies of the tapes. I did include on here how to go about getting the tapes copied, whether you're getting them from the History Society or the Legislative Reference Library. So now we're done with the History Center, and we're going to look at a bill where the tapes are located at the Legislative Reference Library over at the State Office Building. Again, give yourself enough time. This is not nearly as onerous as, and I don't mean to say that that it's a bad thing to go to the History Center, because it's not. They're very protective of their materials, as they should be, because oftentimes they might be the only copy. But it's just not quite as much of an ordeal to go to LRL. So they let me in their back room. I told them what I was looking for, and they let me go in and take some pictures. And so this is what their binders of minutes look like. And then you can kind of read this on the spine, what they say, what committee it is, and what year. And then these are all the boxes full of cassette tapes in there. And you give them your information, and they pull up the box, and then you listen to the tapes. So that's the process for doing the research, and I skipped over, like how long that it might take to listen to tapes. I mean, that really is going to vary. One of the things that I want people to come away with knowing is that sometimes you'll find nothing. I mean, sometimes there just isn't anything. The legislation wasn't controversial, there weren't hearings about it, and sometimes there just isn't anything to be found. So keep that in mind. Other places where you can find information about legislation. If you're lucky enough that the legislative change in question was noteworthy, you might find information in newspaper articles or law review articles, Minnesota Lawyer, or even old CLEs. If you look at the significant change that came about with the criminal expungement law, there have been many CLEs done on that, and sometimes the CLEs will go into reasons why the change was made, why the change was needed, and certainly law review or bar journal articles, you would find that kind of thing, and newspaper coverage is also another place where you can look. And then the two chambers have periodicals that provide a summary of the actions on the floor and committee actions, and so those are also a place to look as well. I wanted just to show you, this is what if you're looking for secondary authority about a particular statute, this is just what it would look like in Westlaw Next. You're not probably going to get a whole lot of really helpful information from this page, because most of these resources are not going to be on Westlaw, but I just wanted you to see that there is a context and analysis tab that is connected to the statute. And I want to spend a few minutes talking about effective dates, because this is a question that we do get from time to time in the library is, okay, so I think I found when the law changed. Now, how do I know when it became effective? And the usual rule is that it's August 1st following the final enactment, unless there's a different date that's given in the Act. Now, an exception is an appropriation bill. This is the actual statute, so this is right in the statutes. And then you can see that it takes effect at 12:01 a.m. on the effective date. So that's kind of the general rule. Now, this is an example of when a different date is given in the session law. And you'll see this sometimes, especially in bigger bills where you've got a whole bunch of sections that have been changed, that will get different effective dates for different sections of the statute. And then the question, is sometimes, well, what does final enactment mean? And again, the statutes provide us with that information, 645.01. This tells us that typically final enactment equates to when it was signed by the governor. Now, there are instances where the governor doesn't sign legislation. If it's a pocket veto and he lets it become law without his signature, or if the bill is vetoed. And so the statute gives us guidance on what the effective date or what the final enactment would be for those situations. And I guess, gosh, I must have talked quickly. I got through the materials really fast. I want to reiterate that this is one of those things that you kind of have to do it to really get it. And I encourage you to ask for help when it comes time to do this. Whether you're at the State Law Library or over at Legislative Reference Library, over at the History Center, but certainly ask for help. We are happy to assist as much as we can. You know, you can tell by the presentation that we only have so much at our library, and then you're going to have to travel if you're a situation where you're going to have to get tapes. But again, I will share my slides with you if you want to hang on to them and keep them for later. Just email me and I'll send them out. Do we have any questions on the chat?
Not yet.
Anybody in-house have any questions? Yes.
I have a question. We used to have to go to the pole barn in the facility over off of 35. The Historical Society kept some of the materials there. Is that they've moved everything from that spot, so you no longer have to go there at all?
And for those of you that are on the webinar, you might not have heard this. One of the questions was that you used to have to go to a pole barn-ish place off of 35 to get some of these older materials. It's my understanding that everything is there. And I'm not 100% positive, but when I went and toured the facility, I don't know if any of you have been there, but it's kind of like that scene in that really bad Indiana Jones movie with the Nazis and the refrigerator. It looks like that. I mean, it's huge, tall ceilings and just stacks and stacks and stacks of boxes and shelves. So I don't think that there's a secondary place. They don't reference it at all in their materials at the History Center that, you know, you might have to go to the secondary location. So I don't think that that's the case anymore. Any other questions? Well, thanks everybody. Appreciate you coming. Feel free to contact me later if you have any questions that come up.
Thank you.
Sure. Are we closed?
Special legislation.